Hi everyone, it's Laura here for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to make a floral card using the Floral Garden stamp set and the embossing resist watercolor technique. To start off the card, I heat embossed the image in the Floral Garden stamp set on some Canson XL watercolor cardstock. The powder I used is gold embossing powder, and the cardstock is cut at 5.5 by 5.5 inches, but we'll be die cutting it later to a size that will fit our card front. At this point, I am using some painter's tape to secure my watercolor cardstock to a hardboard so that I can go ahead and watercolor the flowers. As a medium today, I went for distress inks because the colors are ready for you, so you don't have to mix the colors, and I wanted to go for some quick watercoloring. I started by smooshing the distress ink pad in the color Seedless Preserves on my glass mat, and then I'm going to use a water brush to pick up the color and create some blending on my flowers. Using a water brush, at least in my experience, gives you a bit less control over your watercoloring, but helps you watercolor a little bit more quickly. And today I'm not going for precision, I'm not going for a sort of professional look, but I want to show you that you can achieve some really nice results even with just some quick watercoloring. I still want to create some shading in my images, so what I'm doing is I am picking up the color directly from the mat, I am laying it down in the areas that I think will be the darkest, and then I am first cleaning off my brush, and then I am blending out the color with the water that's coming out of the water brush. And typically I'm adding the shadows at the base of the petals, and then I'm blending the pigment outwards towards the tip of the petals so that I get a good gradient. In some cases, to deepen the shadows a little bit more, I'm going to add a second layer, but in general, as I said, I'm going for some quick watercoloring today. I skipped ahead some of the painting. I painted another flower again with the Seedless Preserves there on the top of my card, and the one in the center I painted with Victorian Velvet. And I'm using Victorian Velvet also right now to paint the flower I am showing you on video. Also in this case, I'm adding the shadows at the base of the petals or where petals overlap. If there are areas that look like they're folding over, there will be shadows under the folds as well. And for this flower over here, as well as the other one that I painted with Victorian Velvet, I'm going in with a couple of layers. And this is because the Victorian Velvet is a little bit lighter, well, it's considerably lighter than the Seedless Preserves, and I want to build up some depth in those shadows, and this is why here I'm working at this flower a little bit more. As you probably realized by now, I'm not going to show you the entire painting process for this card, but I'm going to show you just a couple of flowers to share with you the different colors that I used, and at this point I'm also going to speed up the video a little bit more. But you can always use the tools on YouTube to slow down the video in case you want to take a look at the painting process in a little bit more detail. For this other flower over here, I chose Distress ink in Aged Mahogany. And again, I am creating some shadows by first adding the pigment to the base of the petals and then blending it out. And also, I didn't mention, but the fact that I have the embossed lines over there makes it easy for me to jump from one petal to the next without having to worry about not painting adjacent areas after each other. And this is because the embossed lines basically form wells that contain the water and the pigment. For these smaller flowers, I decided to use shaded lilac. I first added it to the center of the petals and then blended it outwards. And then I skipped the painting for that little rose in the center, but there I used picked raspberry that I mixed a little bit with Victorian velvet to dull it out a little bit more. And this is because picked raspberry is pretty bright, but I'm going for a little bit of a more muted palette on this card. The distress ink that I'm using now to paint in some of the leaves is peeled paint. I am first adding it to the center of the leaves and then I am blending it outwards. And then finally for the smaller leaves I am going to use bundled sage. And by using two different colors of green for the leaves, I'm going to create some variation and add some more interest to the card. At this point, I left everything to dry before I went ahead and peeled off the painter's tape from my watercolor panel. In order to avoid tearing, I am sort of folding the paint onto itself, and then I can go ahead and die cut a panel out of my watercolor piece. The die that I'm using is part of the Studio Katia Dotted Patterns set 3 dies, and then I'm going to layer my watercolor painting over another piece of dark gray cardstock that I die cut with the Darling Ribbon and Dotted Frames dies, also by Studio Katia. And you will find a list of all the supplies used for this card in the description box down below. For the greeting, I used stamps from the Kind Bouquet stamp set by Studio Katia. I stamped the word kindness with Versamark ink on that same dark gray cardstock that I used for my card base, and then I coated it with gold embossing powder. I am making sure that there are no residual speckles of embossing powder around my sentiment, and then I can go ahead and melt the embossing powder with my heat gun. To complete the sentiment, I heat embossed the word matters on that same dark gray cardstock, but this time with white embossing powder. If you have some slightly off-white embossing powder, it would be an even better match to the color of the watercolor cardstock if you are also using Canson XL watercolor cardstock, but this bright white works well as well. I glued the sentiment to the bottom third of my card front, and then I could go ahead and mount everything on my top folding A2 card base, cut at 4 1/4 by 11 inches and scored at 5.5 inches. And then for some finishing touches, I decided to use the Sparkling Crystal Mix. This is a mix by Studio Katia. And I'm using the Studio Katia glue and a jewel picker to adhere all my embellishments in place. And here is the final result. I really love how the gold embossing powder makes this design even more elegant, and I think that the clear crystals are the perfect addition to this card. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I hope I inspired you to create with the Studio Katia Floral Garden stamp set. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.